This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the third week of June 2014. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. So much to discuss the world of mixed martial arts. We were off last week, and it seems like every single day there is major breaking news. So really looking forward to this show. And we've got an interesting panel, a panel that has never been together, so let's see how this goes. Of course, you know him. He is Mark Ramundi of FoxSports.com, making his MMA debut. There he is. Veteran MMA journalist, Jim Genia of the MMAjournalist.com, and the man with the shirt replacing the man with the hat, Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com. Guys, great to have you here. Looking forward to this show, and we have to start with the big Bellator news. On Wednesday, it was officially announced that Bjorn Rebney is out, Scott Coker is in. Now, it had been rumored for quite some time that Bjorn and the Viacom executives did not see eye to eye on the future of Bellator, but this happened rather quickly, and they named his replacement right away, and it was a guy that we're all very familiar with. So I'll ask you at the top, Mark, we'll start with you. Was this the right move for Bellator, replacing Bjorn, the man who founded the organization, with the guy who used to own Strikeforce, Scott Coker?
Well, first, you said this happened very quickly, but I think it was like the worst kept secret in MMA for like the last year. It seemed like, there was always rumors about, Bellator wanting to oust Bjorn Rebney. Is it the right move? I mean, I think that's one of those things. If you ask me in a week, Ariel, I might be able to tell you if that's the right move or not.
He just started a couple of days ago. Give the guy some time.
It just started, right? Yeah. It's hard to say. Universally in MMA, I would say Scott Coker is very respected. He built up Strikeforce much in the same way that Bjorn Rebney built up, Bellator. Only was a longer period of time. Strikeforce was a kickboxing organization. So I think most people are saying that it's a great move, and even people who don't talk a lot, like Ben Saunders came out against Bjorn Rebney. It seems like a lot of people didn't like him in the Bellator organization. I'm not there, so I can't really speak on whether or not he's a great person to work for, but it should be interesting to see what happens. It's a big move, and I think I don't think the plan was ever to have Bjorn continue on as the president, because when companies take over in any, not just MMA, in all walks of life and all businesses, usually Viacom didn't buy Bellator to have Bjorn Rebney continue to run it. They bought Bellator because they wanted to run it themselves, and I guess Scott Coker was the guy they targeted, and that's the guy they got.
There aren't a lot of free agents as far as promoters are concerned in combat sports. Is this the right guy though? Because in the past, Scott has built up his own thing. I mean, Strikeforce, he started that in 1985. They started promoting MMA in 2006, but that was his baby. Now, unless he owns a piece of the pie, which he wouldn't say on the conference call whether or not he did, and didn't like that question for some reason, he's now an employee. Is he the right guy to do this?
Well, there's two ways to be successful as an MMA promotion. You either have to survive or get bought by the UFC. Scott Coker is successful at both of those. He survived with Strikeforce, and they got bought by the UFC. He's a man with a lot of talent, a good eye for talent, and a lot of ability. I mean, we saw what we did with Strikeforce, and hopefully the powers that be at Viacom are thinking that he could, get some of that magic onto Bellator.
And you look at the difference between Scott Coker and Bjorn Rebney. First of all, Bjorn Rebney created Bellator, so this was his baby, and there never seemed to be, he seemed to be having a really difficult time buying into what the Viacom executives were doing. So when you ask whether this is the right move for Bellator, really the question is this the right move for Viacom? Because they're the guys who bought this, and they want to build it up. And they're a TV media company, so they want to build this up into some kind of media product. And one of the ways to do that is to bring on interesting fights. Now, Rebney was always into the tournaments and kind of running things like this is where title fights are earned and all that stuff. But it's very noble, and actually I support that, because I've always been a guy who likes the meritocracy side of sports. But that's not necessarily what's going to sell. You're bringing on all the interesting name matchups. I mean, look at their first pay-per-view. They had a couple of guys who really aren't that relevant as light heavyweights in the world, Rampage and Mo Lawal. But they did pretty well. They did pretty good business, and maybe having Coker, who has a lot of contacts within this business, will serve to bring on some other names who can generate some buzz and generate some ticket sales and some pay-per-view sales, if that's the direction they ended up going in.
What I found really interesting, it was actually in Kevin Kay's Q&A with Luke Thomas right here on MMAfighting.com.
Yeah.
Where Kevin Kay said that Viacom and Spike wanted to put together King Mo and Rampage, just a one-off fight on the pay-per-view. And Bjorn Rebney insisted it has to be through the tournament structure. It has to be through the tournament structure. So that was very telling to me that they were on two different pages. Like, you know, Viacom, Spike, they want the matchmaking. And Bjorn was so, I mean, how many interviews he said will never come away from tournament format. And I'm not sure if that's completely, you know, what led to the split, because obviously there's a lot of other factors, financial and personal, but that's probably like a nice chunk of it too.
Not just the matchmaking though. You said the matchmaking, but it's also the matchmaking that seems contingent upon names. I mean, their first pay-per-view was going to have Tito Ortiz. I mean, that's a guy who's barely relevant, even less so than Rampage or Mo. That's who they were gonna sink their teeth into. So you know they're gonna live or die by bringing on names that they think can generate something. We've been hearing the rumors about Kimbo Slice coming there, which on one level may seem crazy. He's 40 years old now. He failed in his attempt to make it in the UFC. But the guy used to generate a lot of money for Elite XC when he was doing his thing. So
you're in favor of that? You're in favor of that signing?
Favor.
Is this what Scott Coker needs?
It's not something that I'm interested in seeing, but I think, in terms of the vision that it seems to be coming out of Viacom, which is to generate name fights, fights that may not be relevant to any kind of title shots or anything, but just ones that have a kind of a name in there that's going to draw in casual fans. From that side of it, yeah, of course, it would probably do pretty well.
Which is what Strikeforce was, and he didn't say a lot on that conference call when he was introduced to the media, but the one thing he did say was, we're moving away from the tournaments, we're going to go into the super fight type of mode, even though, I mean, I don't think he means legit super fights, just fights that make sense and get people excited, and they probably will move away from the season format and this weekly type of thing where they have 13 straight week of fights. Is that good? Would you rather that or stick to the identity, which is, Bellator was the tournament season promotion and they were doing it their own way. Now they're just like the UFC.
I think it would be good for it to become more of a spectacle type organization, but it should be done gradually. If it's a sudden thing where next week we're going to watch a Bellator that has nothing like it was the last one we saw, that would be too much of a shock. But a gradual walk towards what Scott Coker is good at, these pride type fights, that would be great. And that's just the shot in the arm that both the organization and the sport would need.
Why not turn things upside down? Because I don't know how you guys feel, and feel free to weigh in. I thought the tournaments were holding them back. I thought the weekly format was holding them back. They had to start putting on these fights where the main events, the main cards were completely watered down. I mean, the UFC can't even put on 13 straight week of fights. They try sometimes, but they can't even do it properly. So how could Bellator do it? They need to go to this once. For me, if I'm Spike TV, the perfect resolution to all of this is once a month there's a big Bellator show and people know it, they get excited, we can build it up as media, we can cover it, etc., and then you also have a glory event. So now you have 2 weeks out of the month where you have two great forms of combat sports and you can build up to those events. That to me makes more sense. So why not just do it starting now? Why go gradual?
Obviously, you were not at your phone when the Viacom execs came looking for their new guy.
Yeah.
You weren't there, so they went to Coker.
I know. I'm a little insulted.
And it happened so quickly too, right?
Right.
Just in one day, the interview process was like that.
But don't you agree that all of that was holding them back, and the way to go is to just essentially recreate Strikeforce?
Yeah. Well, again, despite all the problems of the tournament structure, I like the idea of, even though it's just a slogan, I like the idea of title shots being earned. I like the idea of people having to get past the next guy in the bracket to advance. I think all that stuff is really great. I think it's really noble. It's the way a lot of mainstream sports operate. But this is a different thing. And I think Viacom, being a TV company, being a media company, is looking at this as a TV show. And how do you make that work? Well, you make it work by drawing people's interest, regardless of what the stakes really are. Whatever, it doesn't really matter whether this is going to lead you to a light heavyweight championship fight or whatever. You want to put together the best stuff that's going to draw the most eyeballs, or whatever it happens to take form as.
Let me play devil's advocate. Scott Coker is overrated. And I say that because Scott Coker built Strikeforce. And the way he built Strikeforce was this regional promotion. And he was able to build off of stars like Frank Shamrock, Kung Lee. And if you ever went to a Strikeforce event pre-Showtime, it was a brilliant spectacle because people were coming to watch fighters that we had never heard of as national media. They were big deals in the Bay Area. And of course, he had the great rivalry with Josh Thompson and Gilbert Melendez. That was the brilliance of Scott Coker. Once Showtime took over, once Zuffa took over, Scott Coker is not your typical promoter. Scott Coker is not Dana White. He's not Don King. He's not Bob Arum. He's not Vince McMahon. He doesn't quite have the gift of gab. He doesn't have that presence that you think of when you think of a fight promoter that's going to rally the troops, so to speak. Bjorn, to a degree, had that. He was loquacious. He had his own little style. Is Scott Coker as a figurehead, essentially, because they made it very clear that he is reporting to Kevin K as a figurehead, as someone who uses these phrases like, let's get back to you, and we were going to hear a lot of that. And we really started to hear that more when Zuffa took over, when he had no power. Is he the kind of guy that's going to be able to rally the troops, rally the fans, rally the fighters? He's at his best when he builds something up, and that's why I'm kind of surprised that he took this job.
That's actually a great question. But do you need to be that guy? I think that's the question. I think, do you need to be the Dana White figure, the Don King, the Bob Arum, who's going to be in your face and drop F-bombs?
Well, I don't mean that. I mean, there's different forms of promoting.
But
Bob Arum doesn't do that, and he's successful as a promoter.
That's true. But I think there's a certain segment of the MMA population who are kind of sick of Dana White in a sense. Like, they're sick of the in-your-face style. They're sick of, the cursing, and sick of, him insulting fighters and burying people and that kind of thing. And so I think Scott Coker is a nice breath of fresh air to that. Is he that guy that you're talking about? No, he's never going to be that guy, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
But I just wonder if Scott Coker at his best is when he's able to build something from the ground up. He's walking into a situation that's, the waters are a little muddy right now in Bellator. Is he the right guy to do that, is what I'm asking. And yes, there aren't many great options. He's a name that gets people excited. And perhaps from a PR standpoint, from a goodwill standpoint, people like him a lot more than Bjorn. That seems to be very clear. I'm just wondering if this is the best situation now for Scott Coker.
Scott Coker is good at things behind the scenes. He's good at ideas and good at relationships. I mean, he was able to do co-promotion with the people in Japan. And the notion that he would be able to do co-promotion now, Bellator versus Legacy Fighting Championship or Resurrection Fighting Alliance, that would be compelling. I would love to watch that. He's good at that. He doesn't have to be a Dana White, and nor should he be. I mean, he's successful in his own way, and I think he's the perfect person to make Bellator 2.0 a reality.
And both of you guys have mentioned Dana White, and I think that maybe there are some people who are sick of Dana, but I think that there's also an element of the fan base that's sick of the kind of a pretend or pseudo Dana White. And I know when I'm sometimes at home watching a Bellator fight, my 11-year-old son will walk in the room and he'll look and say, "Oh, is that Dana White?" Because it was Bjorn Rebney, the same sort of look, dressed the similar.
Even the announcers look the same with what they're wearing.
A very similar look, and it didn't always come across all that well because I don't know whether that was him trying to be himself or whether he was trying to put on something or try to become the promoter like Dana White is. I don't think we're ever going to see that from Scott Coker. Coker is going to do what he's good at, and one of the criticisms of him has been how Strikeforce ended up really in a hole, in a financial hole. Well, now he's got Viacom, and they're the ones who are going to be managing the books, we assume, and he's going to be the one who's going to be out front and work in the relationship. So it sounds like if he sticks to his lane and does his job, the rest of the job will be taken care of, and it could work. It could work.
And sorry, I just want to be clear about something. I'm not saying he should be Dana White. It's good that he is the polar opposite of Dana White. Not everyone has to go that route. I just mean the typical promoter who, look, there's a reason why, with all due respect to him, and he's very well liked, there's a reason why people aren't clamoring to talk to Ray Sefo when it comes to World Series of Fighting. It's because they believe that Ali Abdelaziz is the one calling the shots, right? There's a reason why when Zuffa took over Strikeforce, people weren't clamoring to talk to Scott Coker because they didn't believe he was calling the shots. If we don't believe he is calling the shots in Bellator and they're making it very clear that he is reporting to Kevin K, now maybe they'll give him total control. Let's see. I'm just throwing it out there. If he doesn't have full reins to build what he wants to build, it could be problematic for not just Bellator, but for Scott as well, because he wants to be his own guy. He wants to be his own boss. That's what he's been for the majority of his career.
Well, I think I would hope that's something that they would talk about before Coker got hired.
Yeah.
It's like your Knicks. It's like the whole James Dolan.
Yeah,
I have to bring the Knicks in.
We're
James
vibing
Dolan.
here. We're having a good time.
Is James Dolan going to give Phil Jackson the reins? Is Kevin Kay going to give Scott Coker the reins?
It actually is very apropos. Yeah.
See, there you go.
So what do you think? Will he?
I have no idea. I don't know. I think why do you bring in Scott Coker? You bring in Scott Coker because he knows MMA. He built Strikeforce up. He's built new stars. He's done a great job. He has the relationships like Jim pointed out. So why do you bring in Scott Coker? Do you bring him in so you can puppet him? No, of course not. You can bring someone who no one's heard of to come in and do that. But you bring in Scott Coker because he's good at what he does.
Yeah, I've talked to Kevin Kay before, and he always comes across to me as a guy who didn't know that much about the sport when he first got attached to it, but then sort of acquired a really strong taste in it. And he gets really excited by it. He really enjoys it. But there's a difference between that and being the guy who really knows how to put together the right kinds of matchups and develop the relationships with the fighters. So Kay and the folks at Viacom might have the overarching vision for what they want out of this vehicle, but they got to have a guy who's going to sort of do all the mechanics behind the scene and make sure the pieces fit together, and that's Scott Coker.
And here's the big difference right off the bat. And you talked to a lot of people contacted me when this news came out off the record saying, "Wow, Scott Coker is back." They love him because he pays well, because he's good at managing relationships. For whatever reason, Bjorn Rebney was not liked very much by managers. A lot of managers refused to work with Bellator, and right off the bat, we've talked about this on this show. Why do people kind of root sort of for Invicta? They want to see them do well. No one was ever rooting for Bellator. People were rooting for Strikeforce. It felt that way in the media, with the fans. All of a sudden, people might feel like it's okay to root for Bellator because Scott Coker, he's kind of like, he's like your lovable uncle. You love talking. He's just he's carefree. He's he's not very polished. He seems like a good guy. He seems like a genuinely good guy, and I think people will root for him. But on the flip side of that, you have Bjorn Rebney, who's just kind of ousted. No one wants to talk about him. They won't answer questions about him. And as I made clear or public recently on the MMA Hour, this guy refused to talk to me for a year and a half for a pretty ridiculous reason. That all being said, can we admit that we kind of feel bad for the guy? I mean, the guy built this thing. It was his idea. Not that long ago, he worked his ass off to get it, funded, and then he gets it on ESPN Deportes, then MTV2, and then finally Spike TV. It's sold and all that. It's kind of a crummy situation, right? I mean, this was his baby, and it's hard to build fight leagues. It's hard, and he did it up until this point. It sucks, right?
Yeah.
You got to feel for the guy.
I do feel for him, and he deserves a ton of credit that maybe he's not getting. I mean, he built something out of nothing, and he did one of those, he accomplished one of those things that's a sign of success in MMA. He helped Bellator survive. And there were times when Bellator was really struggling, but it still kept going, and Bjorn Rebney deserves a lot of credit for that.
But he will walk away with something. Some of these promotions that just went away, and the people who ran them didn't get a dime from it. But I don't think it's been publicized what percentage of the company he still owns, but it seems like it's a significant amount. And we would just have to assume, even though it was not mentioned during Wednesday's conference call, we assume that he's going to either has or is in the process of selling it, and he'll generate something from it, and he'll probably start something else.
Very curious to see what happens to him, and if another league, like what they're doing with Scott Coker, tries to hook up with him and use his name. But yeah, he deserves credit because it's very hard to do that. So let's put a bow on this. In 5 years, is Bellator still thriving, surviving on Spike TV, or is this the move that keeps them going?
I think so. I think Bellator will still be around in 5 years and they'll be okay. And I don't think they're ever going to be in a position where they can overtake the UFC. And if they were, it would probably take more than 5 years. But Coker has a track record, and I think the bottom line is Viacom wanted to steer Bellator in one direction, and Bjorn Rebney didn't like that. I mean, just look at that promo, the Thompson Prindle promo. Told you all you needed to know about Viacom versus Bjorn Rebney.
What are you talking about?
The crazy freak show James Thompson, Eric Prindle promo where
when they were pretty much. Prindle, I was thinking of like some ad agency. That's how this stuff doesn't resonate. Like these fights mean nothing.
Well, that promo was either the best promo of all time or the worst promo of all time, depending on who you ask.
Sure. I actually thought it was a good idea. Just go the complete opposite direction.
Right, but that is the absolute antithesis of what Bjorn Rebney wanted from Bellator. His buzz phrase was always real sports competition, and here's a promo basically saying this is a complete freak show. Watch it because it's ridiculous. So that must have. I mean, I can only imagine when he saw that promo like how he felt, because it's the complete opposite of everything that he stood for, and that was like
Coker's idea.
Who knows? I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't know whose idea it was, but I'm sure it wasn't Bjorn Rebney's idea.
Food for thought. You asked whether Bellator will be around in 5 years. Maybe the promotion will be around for 5 years. Probably will be, but may not be Bellator. There might be. That was Bjorn's baby. That's the name that he gave it. If these guys are really looking to create something that has a lot of buzz, I mean, when you get the Ultimate Fighting Championship, you know exactly what you're going to get. But I think there are still people out there like, Bellator, is that what is that? It could be a brand of anything. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Viacom, rebranded things and, called it something completely different.
Viacom Fighting Championship.
Or Dana White calls it Viacom MMA, which, that is the parent company. And to be clear, this is really Bellator 3.0, because 1.0 was what Bjorn wanted. 2.0 is what you're talking about now, the Thompson print. That was not what Bjorn wanted. This is 3.0, right? This is a whole new set of circumstances, but it's not what the original was. There was a step in between there that we're kind of overseeing, right? Overlooking, I should say.
The transition phase, sure.
Right. Yeah. Okay, let's move along, because there's a lot that's going on in the world of MMA. Wednesday night, the New Mexico Athletic Commission announced that they had suspended Jason High for 1 year for pushing referee Kevin Mulhall after his loss to Rafael Dos Anjos at the Fight Night event in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, this comes after Jason High was cut by the UFC. Dana White's saying that he didn't even look at the tape, heard about it, that was enough for him, he's done. Was this too harsh?
The knee-jerk reaction is to say that it's too harsh. But the fact of the matter is this is a serious infraction. I mean, if this was the real world and he put his hands on a police officer, that's felonious assault, whether you're just pushing the police officer or you're throwing an overhand right at him. So by just touching the referee the way he did, Jason High, committed a very grave sin, and he needs to be punished for it. Yes, it's harsh. A year-long, thing is very harsh to deal with. And also, yes, the commission itself is under scrutiny because they had that awful decision. But if this had happened in New Jersey and Nick Lembo issued a year-long suspension, people would be probably questioning it a little less.
I wonder, though, putting it in context, this is a guy who just has been on the mat getting beat on. So I think we can jump to a conclusion that to some extent he was concussed. And there are a lot of times when a fight ends and the referee has just waved it off and the winner is up celebrating and the loser is like grabbing hold of the ref's leg trying to grapple with him. So there are a lot of times when after the final, the fight has been waved off, one of the guys in there is still sort of in competition mode. So I'm not going to say that this was completely unwarranted. I do think it was harsh. I think it was too much. But I think there needs to be some examination as to how we're going to deal with athletes when they are concussed. I mean, he very well might not have been in his right mind at that moment. He's just been beaten up on the side of his head a dozen times. That's going to alter your consciousness a little bit. And so when he gets up and he gives the referee a pretty small push. This was not like Daly taking a swing at Josh Koscheck. This was like a little push, and I agree with you. If that happened to a police officer, you're in jail. So I do think.
But we can't compare the two, because on the streets you can't beat people up. Like you're not allowed to punch someone, and then get up and you know what I mean? Right. So I have a hard time comparing the two scenarios.
Right, but I'm just allowing to say that there has
the authority.
You have to respect the authority, and the commissions do have to protect their referees, their officials. However, this is a guy who has just gotten beaten up, and I don't know. I think that there needs to be some better procedure for dealing with these guys than just letting them get up and there goes. See what happens.
He was clearly angry though, so it was almost like a I mean, he may or not have been concussed. I don't know. It was a pretty hard punch from Dos Anjos, and
you were there. You saw it live.
It was like a few feet.
How
in front
bad
of me.
did it look?
It looked pretty bad.
It did?
It looked pretty bad. I mean, it was hard to see, live what happened, but, I mean, you can see from the replay, for those who actually watched the replay, unlike some certain people who didn't, like Dana White. Look, I mean, I have no problem with the penalties. I think that there should be a zero tolerance policy for, any kind of, assault on a referee. These guys have a hard job as it is. They make split-second decisions, and then, they get crapped on by the media and fans for weeks on end, So now you're going to put in the fear of that, maybe a fighter is going to take a swing at them or push them or assault them in the cage. There has to be a zero tolerance policy. You guys can't, you can't have a referee going in scared that,
Is 1 year fair?
Absolutely, 100%. I think it's fair. I think, in a vacuum, it's fair. In a vacuum, the UFC, cutting Jason High is fair. Commissions don't even suspend guys who fail drug tests for a year, some of them. So, like I said, in a vacuum, it's fair. But you have to also look at other stuff in the commission too, like how do they handle drug tests? How come judges and referees aren't really like subject to some? They had a whole hearing about this decision with Diego Sanchez and Rose Pearson, and the judge didn't come under any kind of discipline. There's money out of Rose Pearson's pocket because of this guy, and it's.
And the reason they gave for that was there's nothing in our rules that state we can change the decision. Well, there's nothing in their rules, it appears,
to assault a referee.
Well, that says the kind of punishment. I just wish there was this uniform law.
Right.
And I know it's hard to get all these commissions on the same page, but okay, what's the punishment for doing this? And if not, to me, it's too harsh because this is a guy who, let's say he fights 2-3 times a year. You're taking away that. He just lost his job. It's not like he swung at him. It was the heat of the moment. To me, the way it looked was, like, get off of me. Like, just leave me alone. It was a controversial decision. There were a couple of shots that landed in the back of his head there. I don't think the decision to stop the fight was the wrong one. Heat of the moment, he absolutely deserved to be punished, fined, all that stuff. But to take away his living for a year, and for the UFC to not even look at this and talk to him and find out what happened, I mean, I just feel uncomfortable about the whole thing. What he did was absolutely wrong. We shouldn't even be talking about this. You can't do that. A year and losing your job, to me, is a little too harsh.
Who are we to judge? We actually either saw it live or watched it on tape, so we're not equipped to make a judgment like someone who actually didn't see any of it.
Right. Well, remember Magic Johnson bumped into a referee? He got suspended for a couple games. He didn't lose his job for that.
Right. Well,
Nick Van Exel as well. You don't lose your job, and plus, this is not like
basketball analogies.
Well, this is not like the NFL where you get cut from the Kansas City Chiefs and you can go to 29 other teams.
Right. Well, the big problem that I have with it is because Dana White said he didn't watch it. At least watch it. There have been so many times where someone has messed up in the UFC and said something stupid or done something stupid. They meet with Dana White. They talk about it. They're apologetic. They say, I messed up. I'm sorry.
Miguel Torres.
And exactly, Matt Mitrione, guys like that. And Dana White will forgive them and give them a second chance because they had a heartfelt apology and they knew they messed up. That didn't happen with Jason High. It was, he didn't watch it and he cut him. I mean, in a vacuum, zero tolerance policy, but at least, watch the damn thing. At least, show the.
I will say this about Jason High as well. I spoke to him on Monday on my show, and I was a little surprised at how, he was just kind of nonchalant about the whole thing. Interestingly enough, the commission said that had he not gone on Twitter, had he not apologized to the referee, the punishment would have been worse. That actually made it less. That's what he said. But, if I lost my job, and you're not going to beg, but you could at least try to reach out to the UFC. It's like, hey, can we get a face-to-face meeting here? Can I explain to you what I was going through? He was just like, what am I going to do? I'm not going to beg. I mean, it's his life, his career, but...
And people have done far worse and not gotten cut by the UFC also. So.
Absolutely. It would just be nice if they, they actually watched it and...
Right, exactly.
Looked at it
cool.
and
That'd be all right.
Yeah. So he gets a 1-year suspension now. He's fined $1,900 and he lost his job. And you feel for the guy a little bit because there aren't many options. I mean, I guess he could go to Bellator now. He did used to fight for Strikeforce, so maybe that's where he goes. Maybe that's the landing spot for these guys.
Oh, they'll be able to cut a great promo for that. This rule breaker, here he is back.
Oh, you think that's what they're going to do?
Oh, it's perfect.
Yeah, Jason Hyde, the rule breaker. All right, let's move along.
Maybe they're going to have him fight a referee in his first fight.
Scott Coker? Hopefully he's listening. Okay, let's talk about Renan Barao and TJ Dillashaw too. Dana White said in Vancouver that was probably, quote unquote, what they were doing. And this caught a lot of people by surprise because the first fight was so one-sided. I tend to think that you should build up Dillashaw, have him fight a Sun Tzu, maybe another fight, build up Barao, and then they fight each other. Because look, the pay-per-view numbers weren't great, and at least what's been reported by our own Dave Meltzer. And while the rematch will probably be better because Dillashaw now has some star power and whatnot, I still kind of feel like if you go to it right away, it's not as sexy as if Barao comes back and beats 3 guys in a row and looks like a real killer, and now he's back. He's just coming off that loss. I think this is a mistake. What do you think?
I have no problem with it, actually.
Really?
I have no problem with it. Are there maybe some better options? Like you said, build up Dillashaw, have him,
Sunsao beat him.
win,
You have
right.
that fight right there.
Or how about Dillashaw versus Uriah Faber?
Well, I think it's a little too soon for that.
Let's say Uriah Faber, crushes Alex Caceres in July.
Too soon.
Too soon?
Too soon.
Hashtag too soon?
Hashtag too soon. Build them up. Build up. You have so many great options now.
Too soon for Dillashaw Faber?
Yes. You have so many great options at 135, right?
You do?
Yes. You have Dillashaw, a Sunsao.
Okay.
Sunsao beat him.
You
have Dillashaw, Cruz, right?
Yes.
You have Dillashaw, Faber.
Well, Cruz,
you have Dillashaw,
we're not really
Barao.
sure.
You have Dillashaw. You have Dillashaw against Mizugaki, who's out there, who's on like a 5 or 6 fight winning streak. Well, let's not get crazy. So my point is, build up Dillashaw. Give him the matches that are obvious now, and a Sunsao is the obvious one, and then let's see how things shake out. To go with the Barao rematch right off the bat is kind of like doing what they did with Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos, but worse, right? It was at least he got one fight in between.
Well, you just said it though. The precedent has been set. It seems as though in the UFC, when a champion loses, that champion generally gets a rematch against, and particularly,
if it's close,
particularly
well, this wasn't close.
Or if it's a dominant. This is, I mean, in Barao's case, we're talking about a really dominant guy. What was it, 32, 33 fights in a row that he had?
No one knows.
We don't know. There's some number out there,
30 something.
30 where he had not lost a fight. So he was as dominant a fighter as the UFC had on their roster. So, because of the precedent, and I will say that on fight night, as soon as the fight happened, and I was writing that night, I was calling for the rematch too, because I mean, it was not a close fight, but the first round when Dillashaw put him down and started battering him, when it looked like he might actually finish him, he didn't finish him, but in a sense he did finish him, because I don't think Barao was ever the same for the rest of the time. At least that was the way I looked at the fight. Other people will say, well, he recovered and Dillashaw beat him some more. Well, let's see what happens when they fight again. Let's see if they can do it again. I do agree with you that promotionally, I think that in terms of building up a really interesting narrative, there are other fights that might fit in well. But I think this is the way the UFC has operated, and I'm not sure that they need to stop that now.
And
Jim disagrees.
I disagree.
Yeah,
I disagree. We've seen this before. BJ Penn versus Frankie Edgar, immediate rematch.
Right.
Chris Weidman versus Anderson Silva, immediate rematch.
But can I just stop you for a second? BJ Penn, Frankie Edgar, controversial. Weidman Anderson, somewhat controversial with the antics. There was no controversy here. Keep going.
Well, the only controversy would be that Renan Barao is so dominant, and where the hell did this version of TJ Dillashaw come from?
Is that controversial though?
It's storyline, and it's a storyline that maybe is worth revisiting some more. We also don't know, the contract-wise, what will 2 losses in a row do to Renan Barao's contract? Will that give the UFC more leverage further down the road? And is the UFC confident that TJ Dillashaw would beat him? If they are, does this build up TJ Dillashaw's aura? Because they've invested a lot in Renan Barao, and did that all go down the toilet now that TJ Dillashaw?
Well, guess what? It'll really go down the toilet if he loses twice, because then he gets into that, Faber Benavidez territory where he lost twice to the champion and has nowhere to go. At least if you keep him around with 1 loss under his belt, you build him up. I would do Barao versus Francisco Rivera, who lost to Takeya Mizugaki. He gets that win if he wins.
What if he doesn't?
Now he has some. So what? He still didn't lose to the champion twice. This sport, everyone has such great short-term memory. You lose 2 in a row, you win the next one. Everyone thinks you should get a title shot, right?
I just think the UFC spends so much time building up Renan Barao as the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world.
Right.
Then he goes out and he gets dominated by Dillashaw. So I think that story, they can kind of use that in the rematch. The storyline, like say that the best pound-for-pound guy in the world got knocked off by this Cinderella story. Let's see if he can do it again.
Isn't the chase more exciting? Don't you find that the chase of seeing the guy build himself back up?
There's that short-term memory thing again, though. This just happened.
Right.
This just happened. Last month. If they do it right away, people remember that's the last fight. That's fresh in their memories. If you do it a year and a half from now, people can even get to remember. It could be 2 completely different story paths for both guys.
I agree with you though that even though I like Barao Dillashaw 2, I like that, but I will agree with you that if Barao Dillashaw 2 comes a year and a half from now, after each guy has won, say, 2 fights, it's a bigger fight.
Way bigger.
It's a way bigger fight. So I agree with you that in terms of like selling a fight, you're right on. But I do think that when a dominant guy who's who's unbeaten in 30-something fights, loses, it's okay for him to get a shot to go back to the top.
I think if he loses controversially, as I said, then it makes sense. If it was so one-sided and the champion has a loss to the top contender, because remember, Sun Tzu was offered this fight first, couldn't do it because of his injured rib. He has a loss to him in October, short-term memory. There's a storyline right there. Now, this is not going to do great numbers. Sun Tzu is not a big name, but this is all part of building up TJ Dillashaw. I think it's a layup. I'm a little surprised they're going this route.
Is that a pay-per-view main event?
Maybe not.
Dillashaw versus Rafael Sun
Maybe
Tzu?
not, but maybe on Fox you build them up, or FS1, build them up, get a couple million people watching. They could use that with TJ Dillashaw, right?
Sure. Apparently, according to the numbers.
So now you're back on board.
Oh, no, absolutely
No, you're not. All right.
No.
How about you? No?
No.
I didn't make you into a believer. All right, fair enough. Speaking of rematches, I thought this was very interesting. The most interesting thing that happened, in my opinion, following the fights on Saturday night in Vancouver this past weekend was Demetrious Johnson's passive-aggressive tone when talking about John Dodson. Demetrious Johnson is a very likable guy. He really speaks no trash talk, doesn't put anyone down, is really a company guy. And he's so dominant, and we've talked about him and why some fans might not like him and why we appreciate him. We've gone through that. But you could tell when he talks about John Dodson that he, A, really doesn't like him, that he is annoyed by his antics, and that he doesn't believe he deserves another shot at him. And I think this is great. And I think Demetrious Johnson needs to build this up more. He needs to run with this. It only will help him if he fights Dodson next. Dodson is the best thing to happen to Demetrious Johnson. People want to see rivalries. That first fight was close. It was interesting. Dodson was winning early on. And I don't know if Demetrious understands that. And that's frustrating to me. What do you think of what he's been saying about Dodson in a passive-aggressive tone?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything that you said just now.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
You'll be back next week.
Exactly. Yeah, this is the best thing that could happen to Demetrious Johnson as UFC flyweight champion. Actually having a rival who's a viable contender, who people think that could actually beat him. And because there's no one else out there in the flyweight division. The flyweight division is super thin, and people just really aren't paying attention to it.
Faceless names.
Sure, exactly. And I mean, Ali Bagatinov, I mean, I don't know what the numbers were for Saturday, but I don't think that's going to move the needle. But yeah, a rivalry, like you said, and two guys who are going to, there's going to be an interesting build up to this fight. There will be trash talk. I know they'll still be 5-3 at the end of the day, both of them, but there's going to be.
But that's appealing to you.
That's very appealing to me. I'll be
these are your
to my
heavyweights
screen because I'm actually
right.
the only guys that I'm taller than in the UFC. But
sort of taller.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
negligibly. Yeah.
Right.
But that's really what Demetrious Johnson needs. I mean, he's probably the most anonymous, aside from maybe TJ Dillashaw now. He's probably the most anonymous champion in the UFC. He's the smallest weight class. The best thing for him right now is a rivalry, a guy who's going to talk crap, a guy he really doesn't like.
Yes.
So he's not going to try to be respectful because he really doesn't. You could tell just by what he's saying that he really just does not like something about John Dodson rubs him the wrong way. And you have Demetrious Johnson like this, this goody guy, Boy Scout type, and Johnson is the goody type, and then Dodson, talks a lot of smack, and he's very he's very excitable, and it's a perfect foil. I love it. It's great.
Are you buying this?
Demetrious Johnson is great at fighting, but it's very possible that he's not great at talking. So if he doesn't have that Chael Sonnen gift to gab, having a rivalry isn't really going to carry that fight. I mean, Dodson will talk his smack, and DJ will just be like, okay, whatever, let's just fight.
Sure.
Yeah.
But if he kind of, if he does that to him,
if
he gives him the stiff arm, I like that. I want to see some fire out of Johnson. I don't want him to turn into Chael Sonnen. I'm not saying that. I don't want him to fabricate anything. But I find it surprising that he doesn't recognize, or at least maybe he's tricking us, but it sounds to me like he doesn't recognize that Dodson is the best thing to happen to him right now.
I don't think that's his game. I think that he's a really systematic guy. Watch him fight. He sort of breaks people down systematically. We look at him and we think, oh, he's just fast, but he's not just fast. He has like very precise movements, and the way he works in the clinch, all these things he does, it's very systematic. And when we were watching the fight, last fight, he kept getting into a clinch right in front of his coach, Matt Hume, and listening to everything that Hume it was amazing. You always hear cornermen saying things and the guys never do it. So he was saying things and he was doing it. He's a very systematic guy. So if you now translate that into the way he thinks about a fight.
There goes the water. We finally proved to people that there's actually water in those cups.
I'm not sure if Jeff had water after that little
that was exciting.
There might have been something else in there.
Let me keep going.
Sure.
The way he tries to promote a fight, he also is going to be very systematic. And he looks at it as, well, I beat that guy, I beat that guy, I beat that guy. He's beaten all the top 5 contenders, I believe. But the one guy that owns a victory over him who's in the top 10 is Brad Pickett. Even though Pickett is, down a ways in the rankings, I think Mighty Mouse wants him. He wants to face that guy. And maybe they just do that fight and then, we get more build-up, because it sounds like, to your point about how he's not a Sonnen. He's not Chael Sonnen, so he's not going to be a guy who's going to excite everybody real quickly. He's going to be a guy it's going to be a slow build. So maybe sort of, keeping Dodson at arm's length for a little while longer while he takes out somebody else might sort of get Dodson a little more agitated and make Mighty Mouse a little bit more agitated as well. So, I'm fine with him picking an opponent as long as it's a top 10 guy. But I do agree that ultimately, the biggest challenge for him at 125 pounds is John Dodson.
And see how exciting flyweights are? Jeff spilled his drink talking about the 125-pound division. That's how much he was enthralled
by the way, I like the Pickett idea. Pickett has a fight coming up in July, so he has to win that fight. His debut at 125 was okay. I don't know if it's worth a title shot right now, but it was okay. And I know what the people are going to say. I can see it now. Oh, Ariel wants us to be WWE. It's not. But if you can't recognize that the guys who get the fans excited, the guys who talk, when there's a rivalry, if you can't recognize that that's been a part of combat sports since before WWE ever existed, before, like Muhammad Ali, the greatest trash talker of all time, said that he stole his shtick from Gorgeous George, a professional wrestler. It comes from that world. And it's not just pro wrestling. It's just people like conflict. People want to see. They want to pick sides. They want to see that. They don't want to just see, like, may the best man win. That's just not the way it is. And we need to recognize that, and I think Demetrious, maybe to a degree, needs to recognize that.
Well, the fact that we're even talking about Demetrious Johnson versus John Dodson on this show kind of says that people are interested in it. That it's not, we're not talking about other, potential, rivalries somewhere, because Johnson needs someone like this. Johnson needs someone to up his, if he beats Dodson again, it'll up him in the eyes of the fans, and if you can get some heat behind, a fight, it makes it all that more important. People, it's the story. Like you said, it's the story. People care about the story.
Let's end on this. Earlier this week, the Nevada Athletic Commission held a hearing, and the main event, at least for us, was Chael Sonnen and Wanderlei Silva. Before we get into that, just curious, what did you think of the UFC's decision to air this on Fight Pass? Do you like this? Do you think they should do more of this?
That's a great question. I don't have a problem with it. I don't dislike it. I guess I kind of like it. I'm kind of ambivalent to it, but I can see that they're trying to find new original programming for Fight Pass. They're trying to, I don't want to say be more journalistic about Fight Pass, because obviously that's not going to be the direction they go in, but they're trying to find different things. They brought Invicta in, Invicta is going to be airing on Fight Pass. They should have streamed that the Bellator call yesterday on Strike on Fight Pass.
What do you think, Jim? Do you like this?
I like it, and I like what it indicates. It means that they're striving to get interesting content. They're trying to cater to their audience. Obviously, the audience for that call would just have been media.
Right.
But it shows that they want to make something out of this UFC Fight Pass thing. And if there's things that are interesting outside of just UFC events, sure, bring it on.
I actually disagree with that. I think that if you're willing to get up at 7 a.m. in the East and watch UFC in Macau or in Singapore, those are the same kind of people who are going to probably watch.
This is the hardest of the hardcore.
Yeah, those are the same kind of people. So yeah, I in a sense, I do absolutely agree with you. They're catering to that Fight Pass fan base. So yeah, I don't see anything wrong with it.
Well, also there was something risky about it because they didn't know it was live. They didn't know what was going to happen to their fighters, but in a way that was an admirable side of it as well, because they didn't hide away and try to pretend that Wanderlei Silva and these guys don't exist. They basically said, okay, we're gonna present this to you. These are guys who fight in our promotion, and they're coming under some disciplinary action, possibly or likely, and they aired it. So I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that they put it out there. I definitely was, yeah, definitely was a good thing.
The word that comes to mind is transparency, and that's one big issue that I've had with the UFC in the past as far as their broadcasts are concerned. Because remember when BJ Penn fought Joe Stevenson for the lightweight title, when Sean Sherk had his issues, they wouldn't even address why Sean Sherk wasn't fighting, and they've done this in the past. And that's because the promotion controls the broadcast. They can talk about whatever they want. They can put that curtain up. This was transparent. I mean, we're talking about real issues here. Dana White's tweeting about it, trying to get people to obviously, be interested in Fight Pass. That's fine. But wow, if this is what Fight Pass can be, and they could show more of this stuff, and then maybe gobble up, the RFAs and the Invictas and whatever, this now becomes sort of a network for, all things MMA. And if they're going to actually, put this out there and show this side of mixed martial arts, which, let's be honest, they've kind of ignored for a long time, unless we would talk to them in scrums and things like that. They would never promote that this was happening. I love it. I think it's an outside-the-box way of promoting Fight Pass, and I think it's a layup. Now, let's talk about what happened. Wanderlei Silva, let's talk about him, and it was a little disappointing that they didn't actually come to a decision. It was just a information gathering session, which, was... I kind of felt like it was the old bait and switch with the Fight Pass situation. But anyway, his lawyer says that he took diuretics because he injured his wrist filming The Ultimate Fighter Brazil. It was to reduce water retention, anti-inflammatory, all this stuff, and that's why he didn't want to take the test. What do you make of this?
It's a farce. It's a comedy. I think the diuretic that he took is also a masking agent, a masking agent for other banned substances. That's we can only speculate what that really means.
And who knows what he really was on because he never took the test. Right. This is just what they're telling us.
Exactly. The fact that he ran out of his gym. First, it's hilarious with the way it was described, the testimony. I mean, he was, I'm just going in the back, gone.
Yeah.
But it's just, it kind of puts like a weird punctuation mark on Wanderlei Silva's career. And it's sad and funny at the same time.
Yeah. How about this? Exactly what Chael Sonnen said is what happened. The hyperbolic Chael Sonnen had this funny story about what happened with Wanderlei Silva, when they were brought, when the drug test people came, and almost verbatim what Chael said is what the person from the commission.
Well, look what happened. So these tests are supposed to happen, and Wanderlei essentially fails twice. He fails by running away, and then we find out that he admits that he was on something. So it's almost like failing 2 drug tests, and that's going to just completely wreck his legacy. Sonnen, on the other hand, takes the test, fails the test, and yet because of the way he is, he can control the narrative. He retires, and now he can just talk about it, and his legacy is going to continue because his legacy is about talking, and that's what he's really good at. So he's able to shift when he wants to shift it over to Wanderlei. He can do that, and when it comes back to him, he can talk about it being, about starting a family, and who's gonna oppose someone taking a substance in order to start a family? This is, in a sense, this was the microcosm of Chael versus Wanderlei in such a beautiful, here's Wanderlei running out the door, completely destroying whatever legacy he had, and here's Chael boldly taking the test and sort of coming away somewhat scarred, but for the most part coming away as the guy he's always been.
Chael would have looked fine, in my opinion, if he would have given us this explanation about family and all that stuff. He had the perfect out. He could have just said, they took me off testosterone, I had to figure it out, and guess what? I messed up. I didn't do my due diligence. I didn't see that this stuff was banned. I was trying to get back into it maybe a little too quickly, but I was thinking about my family. Once he started getting into the whole in competition, out of competition, who am I supposed to ask if this is, then it got all weird, and maybe he went on TV a little too quickly. But he had the perfect out, and he knew he was gonna, package it in his own way. He had the perfect out, and that was a little disappointing. I think the second time around, when he had a chance to talk about in UFC Tonight, he did it a lot better. The first time around was a little unfortunate.
Well, that's because you know some of the details, and other people who follow it closely know the details, but the general public, a lot of people just will buy that stuff pretty much on face value. So he wins over those folks, and then those who are still skeptical, then he brings in, the sort of the quote-unquote real story. I mean, I think that his biggest issue here was was taking a fight. I mean, that was ultimately, you can't say that he was wrong for taking these substances. If he was coming off of TRT and he also, you know, wanted to start a family, apparently these are things you need to take.
Although one wonders how Dan Henderson was able to come back after being on TRT in late March and fighting on Memorial Day.
But how did he do?
The family.
I mean, he got tossed around like a rag doll.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Does Chael remain retired?
No, not at all. He's too good at what he does.
What do you
Too good
think?
talking.
I think no. I think there was reports today that he's already going to be doing Metamoris.
Well, I mean, fighting like a UFC, because I could just see a guy pulling out 4 weeks out. He goes on Twitter, people go nuts.
Right, but here's the thing though.
In a year,
you have to imagine that he's going to be. He might go back on TRT if he's not fighting. Sure. He might go back on TRT. So if there's a short notice situation, he can't go. I mean, we've already learned that he can't get off it quickly and take a fight. So I don't think the short notice someone pulls out of a fight. People want Chael Sonnen to step in. I don't think that's going to exist because he's going to be continue taking banned substances.
He might not need to go back on TRT if he's not fighting. He can take other substances.
According to what he said, though,
But he can take other substances. He could take other substances to regulate his testosterone. That's apparently what he did.
Now, do I think that he'll continue to try to find legal remedies to naturally build his testosterone back up to potentially fight again? I think absolutely 100%. I think that he's probably still trying to fight again, but as of now, it was a brilliant PR move to kind of just put everything to rest. I'm retiring. It was it kind of is Chael's legacy. He always owns the PR.
Right.
I don't think he has a title run in him anymore. I don't know that he'll remain retired in the sense that he's fought his last fight. But I don't envision him coming back to make a title run. I see maybe at some point down the road.
I don't think he's making a title run.
But some opportunity comes along. He's shown himself to be a guy who will fight on short notice and in any weight class. Something's going to come along. It's going to be big money. Maybe he'll jump in, but I wouldn't be surprised if he fought maybe one more time or something like that.
I still think people want to see him fight Wanderlei Silva and Vitor Belfort. Yeah. I still think those are absolutely marketable, bankable fights, 100%.
Do you want to say something? Final word?
Well, you made me realize that we did see the Ultimate Fighter Brazil finale between Wanderlei Silva and Chael Sonnen. It was on the Fight Pass in that hearing.
Wow, how about that? Very fitting.
Yeah.
Very fitting. It's funny, when this news came out, all this madness about Chael last week, I figured most of this episode would be talking about that, but so much has happened. It seems like every day there's major breaking news in MMA, and we relegated it to the end. We could do a whole show. We didn't even get into Vitor Belfort's part in all of this. We will save that for another day.
Can I get my final word?
Yes.
Actually, 2 words.
Sure.
Soaking wet.
Soaking wet. How are your pants?
When does this show end up on Fight Pass? Anytime soon?
We're in talks. We'll get back to you in a week or so.
Sounds good.
How about that? Great show, guys. Appreciate the time and the knowledge. And as always, we want to hear from all of you. Let us know in the comment section below what you thought about anything we discussed or didn't discuss on this episode of the MMA Beat. And guess what? We're back next week. Hopefully, we'll have 8,000 more things to talk about. The way things are going lately, we probably will. For Mark, Jim, Jeff, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching the show. We'll see you next week.